Hello, welcome back. I'm Chris, and I'm reading the Claremont Run, a period of X-Men comics written by Chris Claremont from 1975 to 1991. Last time I talked a bit about history of comics, history of the X-Men, a bit about Claremont and about myself. And this time we're going to go into the team, both on the page and behind it. And then also maybe some of the events of Giant Size X-Men, since that's really tied in how the characters are introduced. So while not specifically written by Claremont, Giant Size X-Men in 1975 is considered the start of this era. And that's written by Wein, and the art is by David Cockrum, with influence from editor-in-chief at the time, Roy Thomas. He took over as editor-in-chief in 1972 after Stan Lee decided to move into the role of publisher. And there's a little bit of turnover during the 70s with the editor-in-chief, but Roy Thomas is editor-in-chief at this point. And under his vision, there's a real emphasis on having a more diverse and international team. He specifically said, "I thought the X-Men shouldn't all be white Americans." It establishes the new X-Men team with completely original characters like Storm, Nightcrawler, Thunderbird, and Colossus. And although Claremont's more well-known in his association with these characters, he really summed it up by saying, "The history of modern comics would be incredibly different if you took Wein's contribution out of the mix. The fact that he doesn't get credit for it half the time is disgraceful. We owe a lot of what we are, certainly the X-Men, to Len and Dave Cockrum." And David Cockrum will end up doing the art past just Giant Size X-Men for about 20 to 30 issues, and then John Byrne takes over, and then Cockrum will come back sometimes. But Len Wein really just did this first issue, but we appreciate him for it. So now that we have a bit of background on the creators at the time, I'll try to give you a little bit of updates when there are any major shifts in the team. But let's start looking at our characters. So first, I'm going to go through the original X-Men. Sometimes I might accidentally call them the old X-Men, but they're not older than the new X-Men. So I'll try to say original to keep it from getting confusing. And then I'll kind of delve into our new characters, and then I'll probably save Jean and Scott for last because I have stronger feelings on them. So the original X-Men were all recruited as children or very young teens by Charles Xavier to be part of the X-Men and train and learn their powers. And that original team was Angel, Iceman, Jean as Marvel Girl, Cyclops, and the Beast, whereas the new X-Men are adults by the time that they kind of come into this, and they've already used their powers for a while. So let's start with Warren Worthington III, aka Angel. He has giant angel wings so he can fly. I think he also has just sort of enhanced athleticism, enhanced strength and agility and stuff like that, more resilient. His family is super rich, so he's also super rich and has a lot of privilege that a lot of the other folks don't have. Scott was found in an orphanage. Warren's doing okay. He will go off to kind of run the company for a while. We don't see him for most of this, at least the first 6 years or so that I've read. I guess he, in the original comics, was kind of spoiled and elitist and not great, but we don't see enough characterization here for me to really make a call. Next is Bobby Drake, aka Iceman. I feel like there's a theme here in being able to intuit what their powers are from their names. Iceman has ice powers, and he's the youngest of the original X-Men. Again, we don't see a whole lot of him. Honestly, he seems kind of like a petulant child from the one issue he's in. He's sort of like the youngest child that the new babies brought home, and he's not the youngest anymore, and he's really mad about it, but he doesn't know how to express it. And I don't know if Claremont likes him that much, honestly, because, again, we see him once. Henry, or Hank McCoy, is Beast, and originally he's a human-looking dude with kind of big hands and feet, and he has super enhanced agility and strength and all that kind of stuff. But later, I think it's an experiment that he does on himself that kind of goes wrong in this continuity. He ends up looking visually beast-like. He's also a super genius. So especially with science and math, he'll come back and sort of make some kind of gadgets or something like that for the team. He is part of the Avengers at the point that our story opens, so he'll come back into the fold every now and then. He still feels kind of like loyal to the X-Men, like they're his family, but he's part of the Avengers, and that's his team and his job. There's Alex Summers, aka Havoc. He has like plasma kind of powers, blast kind of thing. He is Cyclops, Scott Summers' younger brother. They were both orphaned as kids, and I'll get more into that with Scott, but Alex was adopted when Scott wasn't. So they didn't necessarily grow up together, and they had slightly different experiences, but they seem to get along fine. He has been in a long-time romantic relationship with Lorna Dane, aka Polaris. She is like the mistress of magnetism. She has magnet powers and can use it to help her fly. Kind of similar to Magneto. It's widely accepted that she's Magneto's daughter, but in this continuity, I don't know at this point what the deal is with that, because when in like the 60s comics, she was like said to be his daughter, it turns out that they were just tricking her and brainwashing her into thinking that so that she would be on Magneto's side, and that Magneto was like a robot. So I don't know what's going on there, but that is part of her. They kind of don't really want to be on the team anymore. They're very happy to go do geology things and leave this life behind them, but that doesn't always work out for them, unfortunately. Next up is Charles Xavier, aka Professor X. They all train and study and fight and live in his mansion in upstate New York. He's a super strong telepath, and he uses that in conjunction with a device called Cerebro to like enhance his telepathic powers to find new mutants. And he's also really smart. He's like a really talented geneticist and just pretty genius in general. He is in a wheelchair. He lost the use of his legs in an accident in adulthood prior to when this starts. And he is very encouraging of like saving humans and showing them that mutants are nothing to fear through kindness and defending the world against evil mutants and sort of blending in a little bit. On the flip side is Magneto, their longtime nemesis. He has magnet powers, and he's super powerful. And he is very much the opposite of Charles when it comes to how mutants and humans should interact, or Homo sapiens should interact. His approach is more like, you know what? We have been subjugated and oppressed and sustained all this trauma for so long. They're afraid of us for no reason. They hate us for no reason. We shouldn't just keep being nice to them and hoping that things are going to get better. And I gotta say, he makes some good points. He reminds me a little bit of Killmonger in like the first Black Panther movie, just of a recent reference point, where you're like, man, is the villain right? They definitely make him kind of fascist-y, and like he's not perfect. I mean, he has the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. Like they're still kind of evil sometimes, but that I get where they're coming from. Claremont establishes that he's Jewish and was in the concentration camps and survives that, and is like kind of done giving humans the benefit of the doubt. Homo sapiens, they've let him down every time and continue to. So I like that. I feel like I have two favorite kinds of villains, like those where you're like, man, would I be on the villain side? And then the other kind is just like an eccentric rich guy with a murder amusement park. And we get both of those in X-Men, so it's great. All right, next up, we'll talk about our new mutants and our newly established characters first. In no particular order, really, except for the fact that I'm going to start with Nightcrawler because he's my favorite, and I love him, and he's the best, and everybody loves him. Hello, Editor Chris here. I realized I was so excited that I don't think I ever said his actual name, which is Kurt Wagner. So yes, Nightcrawler's name is Kurt. So he's the most like visibly mutant one of the group. And he's got blue skin, pointed tail, pointy ears, almost like a stereotypically like classically demonic kind of look. He has the power to teleport kind of relatively short distances as long as he knows where he's teleporting to. So he can't go from like country to country, but he could go, I think, like 7 miles or so. He definitely increases his range the more he uses his powers. And it's not established right away, but eventually he can hide and shadow his body turns invisible, basically. So he was a circus performer and an acrobat in a circus in Germany. His introduction basically is him being chased out of town, ready to be murdered by this angry mob that thinks he killed someone in town, but he didn't. They're just being bigots because he's a mutant. And part of the reason he's German is because they wanted a more international team, so they sort of added that feature to him. And he's just a really cool dude. He's such an awesome example of like a sex symbol through the female gaze. We'll talk about that later, but I really adore that about him. And fun fact, he was originally pitched to DC for a different kind of group of heroes with a slightly different design, and they rejected him, and so now we get him in our X-Men. Yay. Next is John Proudstar, aka Thunderbird. He has enhanced athleticism in every sense. So he's kind of similar to Wolverine in this way, where he's got enhanced senses, speed, agility, strength, durability. He is an Apache man from Arizona. Sometimes it says New Mexico. I think it's just that the East Coast writers got their deserts confused. I don't know. But I'm going with Arizona, as I'm from there. He was drafted into the Marines and fought in Vietnam. He's definitely pretty stubborn and hot-headed and wants to prove himself and be a warrior. Again, kind of like Wolverine. And it's cool because you get to see one of the first examples of indigenous representation in comics in a way that's not just like a super racist stereotype in a Western or something. However, it's important to note that simply not being an outright racist stereotype is a low bar to clear. Thunderbird's character and arc are not without their problems, especially their brevity, and we're going to dive headfirst into that next time. Next is Peter Rasputin, aka Colossus. He's from Russia, and he's this real strong, quiet, big dude. He's really nice, and he can turn into organic steel. It's not actually steel. The specific metallic composition is not specified. I looked this up because I was curious. But it is magnetic, as we find out when they fight Magneto. He's got a pretty good thing going for him when we find him. He's got a family that loves and accepts him. He's in sort of like a rural kind of farming area in Russia, and they love and accept him too. He doesn't really have to hide his powers. He sort of helps whenever they need someone like ridiculously strong. His younger sister is Ilyana Rasputin. We will see her later, but for now she's just a little kid. She's just like, I want to be strong like you one day, Peter. It's a pretty hard decision for him to join the X-Men because he has a family and a community, and he feels responsible to them as well as the X-Men and the world and universe sometimes that they're saving. Quote from David Cockrum: I just went home and Colossus was one of the first ones that came to mind. We needed a strong guy for the team, so I drew up a strong guy. The character's armor just kind of fell into place. He was accepted pretty much as is, except that I had given him bare legs because it seemed only logical that if we're going to show him armored up, his legs should be bare like his arms. But Len Wein didn't like male characters with bare legs, so he decided that his costume would be blue when he wasn't armored up, and that we'd see his legs when he was armored up due to the unstable molecules in his costume. So, hot source of contention there, Colossus's legs. All right, and last but certainly not least of the new created characters is Aurora Monroe, aka Storm. She is so badass. One of the first major characters that was a woman of color with agency and powers that was a regular part of the story. She's a very landmark character in that way, and she's great. She can fly. She has control over the weather in like every facet. So she can do lightning bolts or wind or rain or change the temperature or even control solar storms when they're in space. So she's really cool. So Storm's mother was from Kenya. I think she's actually like a princess from a long line of African priestesses, but we don't delve too much into that at least yet. And her father was an African-American photojournalist from New York. They moved to Cairo when Aurora's just a little girl, and their house is unfortunately accidentally attacked during the Suez Crisis in 1956, which in broad strokes is when English, French, and Israeli forces tried to invade Egypt by attacking near the Suez Canal. And this is notable. We get this panel and this information a couple issues later from Claremont, but it's relevant to include here. This is a real historical event where civilians died, especially since the attack was so close to such densely populated areas. And you get this commentary on both colonialism and humanity's capacity for violence, as well as the running theme of people just following orders when both her parents are killed. Her mother and her are both buried together under the rubble, and Storm's able to escape because of sort of like early manifestations of her powers and sort of abilities and stuff. But that leaves her with this like really awful claustrophobia that persists kind of through her whole life, but you see her overcome more and more as the stories go on. From there, she is a child thief and pickpocket on the streets of Cairo, and she's a ridiculously skilled lockpick. She will carry that with her and uses that skill a lot to save the X-Men later on. Then from there, she kind of wanders out into like the Serengeti and becomes worshipped as this badass weather goddess, and brings rain to areas with drought, and that's when Charles Xavier finds her. So for her, kind of like Colossus, it's like, I got a good thing going on here. I don't know if I want to go to the US where everyone's going to hate me for being both black and a mutant and a woman. So she decides to go and join out of sort of a sense of challenge and responsibility. Plus, like, what are these people going to do for rain now? They've been relying on a goddess with rain powers. They've probably changed their crops as a result. I mean, what are they going to do? It's fine. No, I think I'm overthinking it. All right, so for the rest of the team, Sean Cassidy, a.k.a. Banshee. He's just a nice Irish dude with sonic powers. He can, like, use his sonic scream and sonic vibrations to help him fly and, do a bunch of sonic attack kind of stuff. He almost doesn't join the team for good because he's, like, older. They mention a lot of times how he's sort of older than everyone else. I don't know how old he is. I feel like I'm going to look it up and it's just, like, 30 or something, and it's gonna make me sad, but no, I think he's older than that. Banshee ran into them years prior, I think, as an adversary, but he was like under mind control. For the most part, he's kind of new. Next up is Shiro Yoshida, aka Sunfire. He's Japanese, and he has these sort of like hot plasma sun radiation powers. And one interesting thing with him is this quote from Roy Thomas: I wanted to add a young Japanese or Japanese American whose mother had been at Hiroshima or Nagasaki as a corresponding character to the X-Men, whose parents at that time were assumed to have been at the Manhattan Project. His costume is specifically meant to evoke the Japanese flag, and he's really only around for giant size. He leaves pretty much after that. Next is Wolverine, aka Logan, although we don't know his actual name for a little while. He has enhanced senses, speed, stamina, strength. He has like a super fast regenerative healing ability, and then he also has adamantium claws and an adamantium skeleton, which is like the strongest metal known to man, basically. John Romita Sr. is the one who originally designed him. He believes he introduced the idea of retractable claws, saying, "When I make a design, I want it to be practical and functional. I thought, if a man has claws like that, how does he scratch his nose or tie his shoelaces?" And yeah, it's a good idea to make him retractable. That's smart. Wolverine is Canadian. He's pretty short-statured and short-tempered, drinks a lot of beer, smokes cigars. He's sort of an anti-hero. He's a good character. And he's an agent of like the Canadian government special forces when we first meet him. So when Xavier goes to recruit him, he's like, yeah, I quit Canada. All right, that brings us to Jean Grey, aka Marvel Girl. I can't say that right. I'm glad that she becomes Phoenix because I can say that a lot easier. She has the power of telepathy and telekinesis, so she can read thoughts and move things with her mind. She's generally referred to as like the weakest X-Men prior to the Phoenix transformation during this. And she's a favorite of Claremont's. You can definitely see that. It said that he was kind of enamored with her. I'll be honest, I never cared about her before reading this. But that's actually a big reason why I wanted to read the Claremont Run, was because I always thought she was so boring. She didn't seem to have much personality or interest. I knew she was important. Like, she's always on every list of female comic character, but I never really, connected with her much. And I love the way she's written in this, because she's one of my favorite characters now, which is so weird to say because she was like the opposite of that before. Same thing with Scott. Scott Summers, aka Cyclops. He has optic laser beams that he focuses through ruby quartz. He has a ruby quartz visor that he wears when he's fighting, and then otherwise he has to wear ruby quartz glasses all the time because he can't turn them off. And he can close his eyes, but that's really kind of risky. So he always needs something like that. He and Jean are an iconic couple. Again, I always, with Scott, I'm like, this man is so boring. This man is so boring and annoying. And he dates Jean, who's, even if I didn't like her, objectively, she's a catch. And he dates Emma Frost later, who's the baddest bitch in the whole universe. And I was always just why are these women dating this boring man? Do they feel interesting by comparison? What's the appeal? And I can say that I understand the appeal now. Scott is one of the first original X-Men, team leader. When we see his backstory, it's revealed that he and his brother were flying in a small plane with his parents. Their father was a pilot, and it crashes, and his parents both die. But he is able to get him and his brother to safety with a parachute. It turns out they were actually abducted by aliens, basically, but that's a story for another time. As far as he knows, they're dead, and they end up in an orphanage. Scott sustains head trauma from that, and he's in a coma for a year, and that's also part of why he maybe can't turn the I-beams off once he gets his power later. But he's not adopted, and he just struggles a lot. He has a lot of trauma from his parents' plane crash as a kid. He's just never had a family, and now that he has the X-Men, he will do everything in his power to protect them and do his job and help his family, even if that means being kind of a tool and kind of boring. He's a very lawful, good paladin, which is not the type of character I generally enjoy. I'm usually more for the anti-hero or the whimsical bard kind of character. So he would definitely be in the Air Force Academy if he didn't have his powers. Claremont writes him really well, though. If you don't like Scott Summers, I'm excited for you to go on this journey, because I didn't either. All right, so that's the team. Next up, we'll be getting into the story itself. Thanks for watching this one. It's a little shorter than the last one, but that's not a bad thing. See you later.